Welcome at Pizza and More. One of our most important ingredient when we bake a pizza is our flour. But what does all these values, all these terms around the flour mean? I'm Juergen and I try now to explain you all the different values, all the different words you hear combined with flour. Yeah, and the most used grain we use for our flour, for pizza especially, is wheat, the wheat grain. And that's the reason why I show you now how a wheat grain looks like and what the structure of such a wheat grain is. Well, yes, this should not be a kidney. This is a wheat grain. I'm not the best painter, but it should be a wheat grain. And what you can see in the center, there is the main important thing. I think the correct term of it is endosperm. And around there are a lot of peels. This one at the outside, the brown one, is the so-called hull. There is really lots of fiber in this. The next one, the green one, is the so-called seed coat. In this seed coat, there are lots of fiber and minerals. And then there is the aleurone layer, where are lots of vitamins, there is protein, there are minerals, and there is some grease. There are some more of those layers around such a corn, such a grain, but these are one of the most important. Directly in the center, the biggest one, is the so-called endosperm. And this contains mainly starch and less protein. And the green one at the bottom is the germ. Here we have some grease, we have or fat, we have minerals, and we have protein. And now, as we know how such a grain looks like, we continue with the flour. Here you can see the different types of flour we have. One thing to the whole meal flour. The whole meal flour has not such a long duration because there is the fat in it, and it could be that the fat gets rancid. The different type of the flour tells you how much mineral is in the flour. In Germany, we normally have here really numbers. So the pastry flour, for example, is 405. The all-purpose flour is 550, and so on. And these numbers we have in Germany tells us how much minerals are in the flour. But here you see the English or the American names of the different flour, and it says not really anything about the amount of minerals, but from the top to the down there are less, and at the bottom lots of minerals in the flour. But if someone tells us he uses to make his pizza dough a 00 flour, this tells us nothing about the quality of the flour. We know only, okay, if this one uses a 00 flour, the 00 flour contains around 405 milligrams of minerals in 100 grams of flour, but it tells us nothing about anything else. It tells us nothing how high is the value of protein, what W value do we have, really nothing. It tells us only the amount of minerals. One value, I said it earlier, is the protein value, and the protein value is a really very important one. In flour, we heard already, there is starch and there is protein. As soon we add water to the flour, the starch and the protein comes together and bind each other to a strong net, let's say to a network, and this is the so-called gluten. The gluten is needed to keep all the water inside of the flour and to keep all the gas inside of the flour. Where does this gas come from? When the yeast metabolizes all the starch and all the sugar inside of the flour, then gas is produced. And this gas should be kept in the dough to get a light and fluffy and airy dough. So therefore we can say the more protein we have inside of the flour, the stronger the gluten structure will be at the end. And what is now my required protein value for a pizza flour? I would say around 12%. 12% and higher. So 12% is the minimum what I personally would recommend for baking a nice pizza. And now to the next value, the so-called W value. The W value tells us how strong the gluten structure is and over which amount of time this strong gluten structure stays. They produce a dough, or they test it really in a laboratory. They produce a dough, and then with a special machine they blow air inside of the dough so that a big bubble is produced. And then they test how strong is the gluten, how much pressure can they blow into the dough. And then the next is they test how long does this strong bubble stay over a specific period of time. The longer it stays and the stronger it is, the higher the W value is. So we also can say what we heard, if we want to make a dough with a very long leavening time, then we need a strong flour so that the dough, the gluten structure stays strong and strong together over a longer period of time. And the other way around, if you want to produce a quick pizza dough up to 24 hours, for example, then you have to use a flour with a low W value. Otherwise, the gluten structure would be too strong when you try to stretch the pizza. Even if you made everything correct, it could be the case if you have a dough with a very high W value and you have a short leavening time, that the dough always goes back like a gummy, and then it's impossible to stretch the pizza, and it might be also when you eat the pizza afterwards, it is like gummy. And again, the other way around, you use a flour with a low W value, and you make a dough with a leavening time of 48 or 72 hours, it could be the case that the gluten structure already broke, and then the dough is sticky. You have, when you stretch the dough, it runs out and it's very weak. It's not nice to make a pizza. There is the danger that it breaks, that you damage it with the peel, and all air goes out because the gluten structure is not strong enough to keep the air back. But which W values are now strong or not that strong? In this list you can see W values and the water they are able to take over. So here you can see up to W 170 we speak from a very low W value or low baking strength. This flour is able to absorb or to take over only round about 50% of water, so 50% compared to the amount of flour. The next one, W value from 180 to 280, we speak from a medium baking strength. This kind of flour is able to take over around 65 to 70% of water. Then from 280 to W value 350, we speak from a strong baking strength or from a high W value. This kind of flour is then able to take over 65 to 75%, maybe a bit more. This depends always a bit on the quality of the flour of water. And then this is perfect for use for pizza with a longer leavening time. And then over a W value of 350, we speak from a very high baking strength, and this kind of flour is able to take over round about 90% water, and this is then normally used for panettone or such things. And now I hope I was able to explain you a little bit those kind of values and how such a wheat grain looks like. And if you have a few more questions, please write your questions into the comments. I try to answer everything. And if you like my channel, it would be fantastic if you would subscribe it. And then we see us also in the next video. Ciao.